One of my pet peeves when it comes to RPGs is when RPG gives you way more party members they can actually use in combat, make it so, unless there's some sort of party-wide EXP, someone will always get left behind, and if they get left behind, then that means a less of a reason to even use that character when it comes to combat. It's something that annoys me because ideally, an RPG should have as many people in combat as there are party members. When it comes to Final Fantasy, you generally only had the amount of characters you needed for combat in your party. Yes, there were caveats like Final Fantasy II rotating out the fourth party member, but you only have 4 characters in combat. Final Fantasy IV, you had 5 characters, but even when there were big moments, like let's say Setsuko Paladin and resetting his level, he wasn't with the final party, so even though he needed to catch up, it was still with a set party of 5 total, although you could have some characters come in later and be lower leveled, but you would only have 5 people at once. You would need to try and get someone else in the back row or extra on reserve who may not get used for one reason or another. At least not unless you're playing the GB and PSP ports where you could swap out party members for your final roster, but that's beside the point. Final Fantasy VI is where it became an issue because you had more character choices than there were active party member slots, with the second half of the game potentially having up to 12 characters if you recruited everyone. But for the first half of the game, you try to be split apart, so it managed to actually handle the big cast of characters pretty well. Yes, there are moments where everyone will be together, so you would have the issue of who do you actually use in combat, but when it came to the second half of the game, it managed to fix it, especially since Final Fantasy VI is designed where every character who joins you will be around the average party level, meaning everyone who joins in will be combat ready when they join, and the second half of the game only really has, for mandatory content, the final dungeon, which requires 3 parties, meaning that big number you can recruit ends up working out in the end, on top of the fact that by default second half of the game, you only get 4 mandatory party members. And then Final Fantasy VII decided to just ruin everything smart Final Fantasy VI did by only having 3 active party members, with the rest of the party not even being around in story segments. They're off doing their own thing off on the sides, which does also help for story moments because it means it's not overly crowded, but it means that characters start getting left behind in levels, not helped by the fact of, oh, there's certain moments where each character has a moment to shine and now you need to use them. But if you weren't really using them, then you may have trouble with their moment to shine, even if Final Fantasy VII is a generally pretty forgiving game, and the materia systems that does a lot of the heavy lifting also means it can alleviate that issue when it comes to, oh, a character not leveled up, the materia can supplement any deficit. The last one I'll mention will be Final Fantasy VIII, because that's where the big issue starts happening with the junction system, where you can draw spells, whether it be from enemies, environment, find them from cards, a lot of stuff, a lot of ways, a lot of methods in order to get spells to attach to your characters. This also means level doesn't matter, what matters is the abilities they have. Once again, you need a character for a certain story moment, you can essentially just give them stuff for the character, bada bing bada boom, they are now combat ready and ready to help out. The issue is not with any of this, the issue is with the game's finale, which requires you to make 2 teams, which sounds pretty simple, but with a game that requires spells in order to actually have your characters be combat ready, it means you now need way more spells to compensate. You can't just switch over to the character stuff because the other person now needs their stuff because of the final dungeon. Making it to where it's a very cool concept. I love the fact that it's a dual party setup, on top of the fact that it has puzzles that require both parties to be in certain positions. It's a very cool final dungeon, just the fact that when it comes to execution, it now makes the junction system more annoying than it was before, even if you were someone who was enjoying it. Not helped that the final boss picks 3 party members for combat at random, which in theory you should be fine if you were making a 2-party setup for the finale, but if you were basically playing favorites in a junction system game that requires you to play favorites, you can now see the problem of the game trying to screw you over potentially because of now everyone has become combat ready, which requires getting more spells. When you get more time for that, and if you decide to just have your big people do the stuff, well, prepare to be punished. The Persona series also went from having every party member be in combat at one time, whereas Persona 1 had other characters you could recruit depending on certain choices, but again, you only had 5 slots, 5 characters, bada bing bada boom, no overdraft. It wasn't until Persona 3 where they introduced overdraft because of the fact you only have 4 people in combat, but you recruit more than 4 characters in the game story mode. And there is no EXP for characters who aren't being used. And that's where it becomes an issue because while the game does try to incentivize you swapping out characters via the tired mechanic, but the fact that the main character also gets tired at the same rate also means that most people are likely to just stop going through Tartarus during that trip in general, rather than just swapping out the new members as they see fit. Meaning those new members start having less and less EXP, so a point you're probably not even going to be using them whatsoever. Granted, Persona 3 is not a game with each character having their own big combat moment where you have to use them, but it's still one of those things where it's like, you can see how they try to circumvent it without giving background people EXP, but the way the execution ends up having people just ignore what the developers were trying to do. Persona 3 Reload tries to circumvent it by having a grand clock mechanic where 2 characters you pick will have their experience skyrocket in order to put them close to the main character's level. It's not always put them exactly there, and it requires using them, giving you incentive to swap out your team, when Reload doesn't really give you much incentive to do much of anything. But they try to do this one-time mechanic, even if, once again, you could just hypothetically completely ignore the mechanic. Or, you also have the aspect when it comes to Persona 4 and 5, where, okay, in Persona 3, typically the original and FES, you had the fact that the characters would refill their SP at Tartarus' first floor. Persona 4 and 5 does not have that luxury. You need to start swapping out characters in order to try and get the most mileage. But once again, despite the fact that that's the goal, people will just play Persona 4 and just leave the dungeon if their main team isn't ready to combat. It's just one of those weird aspects where the Atlas is giving you every reason to use new characters, but the execution just has people preferring to basically not bother, and it's just so weird when it comes to how the games are handled. On top of the fact that Persona 4, they generally give you enemies that the new character you get will do very well against, or incentivize using a new character for the next dungeon. But once again, people just play favorites. Persona 5, on the other hand, actually introduced the ability for back row party members to get experience and a social link with Mishima in order to increase the EXP given, making it a reason they can use them, they're leveled up, they're ready to go, you can swap them in and out, you get them mid-dungeon, so you already have an example of what the dungeon has, what their skill is, and I swear people still won't use other party members, my god. But in Persona 5's case, it's because the game is just so easy that you don't really need to swap out party members, and if you're playing the Royal version, it's even easier to where you could just start out with the first 4 party members you get and probably have one of the best teams in the game as a result. The Hyperdimension Neptunia series is no stranger to having so many playable characters. Like, you already have the main 4 goddesses, then you have the 5 candidates, and you have the makers, which can vary depending on the game, depending on what company actually allows their name to be used, or what they can just legally distinctly get away with. But then came later entries like the Neptunia Victory, where it's decided, hey, how about we add more party members as DLC, which means buying that DLC has the party member come in at level 1 as well. I am mentioning all this to go into a nightmare scenario that is Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth 3. This is I want to say remaster, because I think it's a remake of the 3rd main Neptunia game, Neptunia Victory, and because they decided, you know what, let's be generous, let's just give you all the past DLC characters just for free. How nice. But look at how many characters there are in this game, man. Look at how many characters there are in this game. and you only have 4 people you can use in combat, and then 4 in reserve that also act as support and tag out with combat. So this is just way too many characters, also generally with their own story and cutscenes as well to go with it if you pursue them. Like, my goodness. And I found out I'm recording this is that they actually then added another character, Uzume, who's actually from Neptunia Victory 2, and just backported her into this game. And you can tell they backported her because, according to reviews, she has no equipment, no weapons, no nothing to go with her because they didn't actually bring over her weapons from Victory 2. They just grabbed this character from their big PS4 title and brought it back into this Vita title. Like, that's something that should be cool, but the execution is like, what the hell are you doing? Granted, you don't need to use anywhere near this many characters in the actual game, but just the fact that y'all put this many party members is insane. And yes, it is a case of they just want to give you the past characters as freebies, which is nice of them to do, but it's still crazy. Octopath Traveler, a game whose concept involves 8 people coming together on their journey, with the fact that the only real caveat is obviously that if you're doing a certain character story, they must be the lead of the party, leaving you a lot of flexibility when it comes to the other 3 slots, on top of which 4 characters you want to recruit first and who do you want to save for last when it comes to their story. Or recruit them all early, so that way you can then have the full sweep of options for going through their journeys, rather than leaving one person unclaimed for later. It is a very cool system, even if story-wise, they don't feel like an actual party of people together. They just feel like some schmucks who just happen to be in the room, since the story acts as if everyone's by themselves. But this all comes to a head when it comes to the game's optional finale. I say optional because it's technically a side quest where you go after a big super boss, but it is a scenario that tries to combine all their journeys into one and show the link between the 8 travelers. The problem with this is the fact that this finale expects you to have all 8 characters combat ready because it wants you to use them all in 2 separate parties for this big battle. The other issue is, I mentioned a side quest. Not just a side quest, it's a super boss. So no, it's not just have them combat ready. That'd be easy. Have them super boss game breaking levels already for this big finale. On top of the fact you're also doing a boss rush before you even get to the super boss in question, meaning if you die, you have to go all the way back because you're not allowed to save when you try to do this finale. It is so ridiculous, and it's one of those cases that people bring up of an RPG just out of nowhere suddenly requiring all the party members. People try to go, should you be using them? Yes, people have been using them. Also, business setup, they could not be using them because there are some characters who I just don't find useful for combat with their basic jobs. I'm not going to give them another job, I'm going to try to get them to be somewhat useful. But just the fact that you have to use all your party members in this finale for a super boss, that is nowhere near worth it. But the music, though, is godly. Octopath Traveler 2 did actually make this better, because there are points in which characters will actually split up into parties of 2. So, in order to try and give them a bit more rapport with each other, there will always be, for the 8 travelers, this one other character that they're always associated with, and have little story segments where they must party with them. It's always going to be the same pairs of 2 for the story, so there's going to be crazy mix matching, but it is something in order to try and keep them more used. On top of the fact that this time, a big finale that requires all the party is actually incorporated into the main story rather than just being a super boss. So you don't need no super boss ready. FL handles it very much better because now you have more ways to use them, you'll have more experience using them as certain combinations, and the finale is actually building up to the idea that you're using the entire group of 8, and it works way better. If you hit yourself, there's still
still a super boss Octopath Traveler 2 that also requires 8 party members, and
I don't want to think about the mathematics of how this works, but Chrono Cross has over 40 critical characters. Granted, you can't get them all in one playthrough unless you're on New Game Plus, but there's just a huge variety of characters you can get with their own little stories, and some of which you do have to recruit in order to continue the main story at certain segments. But in order to make them all combat ready, despite the fact you only have 3 party members in combat at one time, is the fact that the game has a system to keep everyone kind of within the same level. More so the fact of certain key fights that will be where characters will roll essentially for increased stats rather than a level up system like a usual RPG has. So the game has ways to do that, and it also means because of the variables of rolling for the stat upgrades could mean a character who's benched may excel at a certain stat than a character who you've been using the entire time. But having a character be used in combat does also give them more opportunities for smaller stat upgrades unless they get KO'd and the fight ends, in which case they just get nothing. But either way, Chrono Cross does have its own way of trying to make sure your characters are within the same ballpark, even if the fact of looking up the numbers will make your brain shatter by how complicated it sounds. All that matters is it works. Earlier in the video I mentioned that I just rather have all the combatants in the party being the full party, and there are some games that do try harder to essentially make sure every person is in the combat at one time, such as Star Ocean Integrity and Faithlessness or Star Ocean 5. Probably the most hated entry in the entire franchise for a variety of reasons, but one thing the game does is the fact that it makes every character in the party into combat at one time, having, I believe, up to 7 total party members who will all be participating and all be leveling up as the game goes on, making it so no one in the party is left behind. I see people complain that they feel like having this many characters in a fight somewhat makes it hard to keep track of what's going on. I don't know, in my experience, I found it to be actually fine to handle when it came to having this many party members in combat, and there are 3 special types of missions that are mandatory, where it is more about defending one person as they do something, so they do try to take advantage of it at certain points. But like I said, this game has a bunch of issues. There's the fact that I don't think having everyone be in combat at once is one of those issues per se. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 also has at minimum 6 party members, with the fact that you get a 7th character that is optional, you can switch out, being one of the heroes. So potentially up to 7 people always fighting at once, meaning they're all gaining experience at once as the game goes on, making it so no one's getting left behind, and the game taking advantage of this mechanic, such as with features such as Ouroboros, the class system, because of the game, with each class also having their own little 3 subclasses of, oh, this one's an attacker, this one's a tank, this one's a medic, stuff like that, to make having 6 characters be really useful for the combat. The only caveat that's not really of the party members aspect is more the fact of, despite this idea of making everyone on equal plane, both gameplay and also story-wise, because I want everyone to always be together and be equally the main character, is the fact that they still do give the character Noah something special that basically shoots him into the way more unique character, and still makes him the de facto main character, even if they didn't really intend for that. So it's one of the cases where they're doing it more for a, hey, let's keep everyone relevant in the game, since some people made issues about Xenoblade 1 and 2 having characters who stopped being useful to the plot, but it also made a caveat of just certain things not working well. Also the fact that the class XP system is completely boring, so you can end up getting no EXP from fights due to having probably 6 characters be too powerful, and that's beside the point. There's a mess in that aspect. Earlier I mentioned how Final Fantasy VII will have non-used party members basically be off-screen somewhere else, which means they don't get experience. Final Fantasy VII Remake decided to just have the characters constantly be split, so that way they can each have their moments to shine, but there's rarely a moment in some Remake where you have all the characters together in one locale, at least not until you're way towards the end of the game. Some in Rebirth, however, made it a goal to have all the characters be together, unlike base Final Fantasy VII, where they would be split apart. But while this does do good for gameplay-wise, having characters essentially be all leveling up together and everything, and also means you can swap up between characters, or also the fact that it means there are segments where each character gets to be the lead for a dungeon, the downside is they need to think about this from a story perspective, where there are some situations where the game has to find an excuse for why these characters aren't supposed to be here and therefore aren't allowed to intervene in a certain scenario, and some of the excuse the game comes up with starts becoming incredibly goofy. By starts, I mean it starts out goofy. This is one of those caveats where it's a cool thing for games with everyone always with you, tag them in and out, stuff like that, the team attacks, but they didn't think about it when it came to narrative and how there are certain moments where the game has to just hand wave away why someone didn't support the rest. I gotta mention it, Suikoden is a series known for having a huge amount of characters you can recruit, but you can only have about 6 party members in the active field. So how do you get around such a thing? The answer? Make the EXP character gains be variable, basically attributing to what level they are, what level the enemy is. If the enemy is way higher level and they win the fight, they get way more EXP in order to catch up. If they're higher level and enemies lower level, then they get less XP, basically making it to where the system is tied, so that way characters can catch up quickly when they join, rather than just having them need to catch up slowly, which is a very smart way of doing that kind of system, even if I know it probably has ramifications later on. I mean, I went to Xenoblade 3 and its variable EXP system that can end up ruining its class system in a way, but that's beside the point. A more nightmare scenario trying to balance party levels is when it comes to like a monster catching game, because then there are so many variables, such as how Pokemon fans still go to war over the fact that Game Freak made a basic RPG mechanic, the ability everyone in a party gets EXP, regardless if they did anything or not, and people hate that mechanic, whether things want to opt to turn it off, or they hate the idea of it for a variety of reasons, the most BS one being, it feels like they have borrowed my Pokemon. Don't you lie to me. Or people saying that the older methods were better. Don't you lie to me, the older method basically punished you for having strats to use multiple Pokemon, since the one that did the most damage is the one that got the most XP. So it's one of those things where you can see people going back and forth on the topic, but I'll just bring up World of Final Fantasy, another monster catching game, but the way it gets around it is the fact that, yes, every Mirage in your party gets EXP, whether it be the active ones or inactive ones, but it's a game that constantly wants to switch out Mirages, since you need certain Mirage types or certain weights in order to be used for dungeon puzzles, so you have to be actually switching them out. Something I swear, based on what I've seen, Pokemon fans are scared to do when it comes to Pokemon, but it's one of those things where the game gives you a reason to start collecting more Mirages and to start using them, since you're gonna need different types later, especially during the post-game content, which requires you to have basically many different types of Mirages of varying different weights, elements, or abilities. Early entries of Shin Megami Tensei actually made it to where demons couldn't level up, so only people get to worry about were the human characters. So when you needed demons, negotiate for them, or fuse new ones, in order to fill out your roster, you didn't have to worry about what levels or anything are combat ready, because by default, they would always be combat ready with the skills they already had, and to think much about it, making it a simpler process and more about managing the human characters. It's until later entries, like Shin Megami Tensei 3, where now the demons also level up and learn new skills, but you're still incentivized to get rid of demons and fuse new ones when the demons run out of skills to learn and stop being useful. because even though they're higher leveled, if they have lower level skills, it doesn't really matter. So what matters more is them being updated or to have better skills, or just be higher level demons with more resistances, and stuff like that if the situation calls for. Or you can also just use one of the Mitamas, which other entries allow you to just buff up the stats and abilities of a demon, even to prolong their use. Because ideally, you would just fuse them away, get a new demon, get something better that works for the situation going on. So it's again, another game that involves having monsters in your party, but like to incentivize to just repeatedly swap them out for newer ones later down the road, which is why I still find it weird how it feels like a foreign concept of Pokemon, despite how many Pokemon are in the game. But I keep seeing instances of people who would rather just hang on to the same Pokemon than actually use new ones for a gym or use new ones for locales they're currently in. Valkyria Chronicles completely circumvents this issue by having the entire type of the character level up instead. So instead of leveling up one particular character, you level up their entire class type. So, the scouts will all be the same level, and stuff like that. Mechs will all be the same level, engineers all the same levels, stuff like that when it comes to Valkyria Chronicles. So that way, what matters most for the characters is what unique quirks they bring to the table when it comes to our likes and dislikes in the battlefield. So you can strategize more about that and having to worry with keeping an entire army of people all combat ready. They're already combat ready, it's just now, how will you use them in your army? Doesn't want to ramble about when it comes to this pet peeve, just the fact of how many RPGs can make it so easy to have your characters be disproportionately leveled, and end up making it to where the underused characters end up not being able to catch up, or you don't really feel the need to catch up. Or there could just be games where they have certain mechanics in order to help them out. Like, one thing I didn't mention is Final Fantasy X with Kamari, and people have to bring up the fact that, I have to use Kamari for a certain story fight, but he's too underleveled. The game thinks about that because the boss is scaled towards Kamari's level, and also the fact that the abilities he can absorb in the fight generally is like most of his blue mage skills, so they do have a little caveat in order to help him out. But it's still one of those things where if they gave people a raise to use Kamari, people probably use them more. On top of the fact of you're going to use 3 party members of Final Fantasy X, and some go out of their way to have everyone do something in combat, because as long as they do one thing, they gain experience, but that's a whole mess of a system in its own. But that's not the point. There's the fact that many different games try different solutions to keep past party members relevant, or give you the option to still use them, while the old-fashioned method would be just screw what the game says, I'll just go back, use those party members, level them up, which is always an option. So go out there, play games where they have level issues with the characters or not, or the game has maybe the game has a cool way of circumventing that. So got a similar topic. Alrighty then, good day.
I'd just like to chime in and say a little bit about XPs in these games as well, and party members and all that. Not as intensive as what was already said, but I just want to throw my hat in there a little bit. So likewise, building upon Pokemon, which was mentioned already in this video, for me, I have had a back and forth with Pokemon. I was all about it growing up, then I had a falling out phase where I didn't care anymore, and now I kind of like came back to it, kind of. I have some gaps in it. I haven't played all of them, but I played a good majority of it. So yeah, likewise, again, coming back to it because I'm a old school, not too old school. I didn't play it like when it was fresh in the 90s, so I didn't play red, blue, yellow, green, gold, crystal, silver. No, I started with fire red and leaf green, and then going forward from there. I will say the XP in those games have drastically changed over time, because back in the day when you played fire red, leaf green, ruby, sapphire, emerald, etc., etc., XP grinding was fucking hell. Absolutely fucking hell. You had to prioritize type advantage, and, you know, like was already mentioned, the type advantage Pokemon tend to get more XP than the others. So my method for XP grinding usually was I would farm the weaker Pokemon, and I would try to have them do the most damage. And if they were unable to kill the enemy Pokemon, then I would have to switch it to my strong Pokemon to divide the XP. And even then, the division of XP Oh, it was so barren. It was so barren. Even if the game gave you the XP share, it still was... Oh, that was like chump change. Level grinding in the older Pokemon games were really fucking egregious. Which is why I was blown away when... Fast forward when I slowly started getting back into Pokemon and I played Pokemon Legends ZA, when I don't know if this is commonplace in the later Pokemon games. As I said, like I pretty much fast forwarded through time since I just only now kind of started coming back into Pokemon. In Legends ZA, all your Pokemon get XP. Doesn't matter if they are out in the field or they're like in your inventory slots, all of them get XP. And the XP is not gutted when they're divided between all the Pokemon you have, which I was very surprised at that. The level grinding in Legends ZA was so easy, such a walk in the park compared to the Pokemon that I played growing up. I was like, holy shit, like that, for me, I found that as a positive change. I was like, hell yeah, I'll take this. I don't know if any of the other Pokemons play like that, because my last Pokemon game I played was Black and White 1. I do own Black 2, but I never finished it. And I have not finished X, nor have I played the rest like Sun, Moon, Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire, Scarlet, Violet, Sword, Shield, etc., etc. I'm sort of back. But yeah, the XP change in Legends ZA is definitely a welcome, and much better than the old system, in my personal opinion. And the last one I want to mention is the Legacy of Goku trilogy. So... the XP in this game, I'm not really going to talk about Legacy of Goku 1 because that game is rough. I more so want to talk about Legacy of Goku 2 and Boost Fury. Now, the XP in that game can vary. For some stages, your characters are set at the level that the game thinks will be relevant to that stage, but then you do have to have a little bit of level grinding. Legacy of Goku 2, in my personal opinion, I feel like the XP was more fair. Especially, you know, back in the day where you were able to do video game glitches. I would have a spot in the mountains when you're supposed to... in the mission where you're supposed to chase Dr. Gero into the mountains before he awakens Android 17 and 18. There's a spot in the mountains where there's a Goku level door. In Legacy of Goku 2, there's character doors that are tailored to the specific character. So you can't play as Goku yet, because Goku is on you play as Goku late into the game. You know, for a game being called Legacy of Goku, you don't really play as Goku. But yeah, so it's a Goku door. You can't open it with any other character. So there was a glitch where you can bait one of the dinosaurs to try to ram you on the door wall. And there is collision. I mean, there's no collision. He doesn't harm you. It's funny. He can't harm you, but you can harm him. So even though he rams to the wall that you're in and you don't take any damage, in a specific frame, in a specific like pixel of the wall, you can actually hit the dinosaur through the wall. And I just kept abusing that, and those dinosaurs contained a fuck ton of XP because they were for like end game level shit. So I was like level maybe 20, I think, during the Dr. Gero segment. And as I kept farming the dinosaurs, all my characters were raised up to like level 35. I was like, hell yeah, I was way over leveled for that segment of the game. So the XP in that game was very fair, I would say. And when you got the character to play as later on for their relevant segment, it didn't feel like they were under leveled. It felt like they were just right. You could level grind a little bit more if you want to, but it felt like they were just right. Boost Fury, however, kind of was like a weird mixed bag with the XP. The one I want to really point out is when you play as Ultimate Gohan. Because after Gohan gets temporarily KO'd and he's training with the Elder Kai, and you're dealing with Boo and the entirety of the mess back on Earth, when the game gets to the part where Gohan comes back to Earth to fight Super Boo and he's in his Ultimate attire or Elder Kai Unlock ability, because, you know, he kind of switches between either calling him Ultimate Gohan or Elder Kai Gohan. Unlockability Gohan, or hidden potential, I don't know, he has many names. Yeah, but point being, when you get back to that Gohan, the game puts you at level 125, because the last time you were playing as Gohan, you had to level grind to, I believe, level 80 or 85 to use his character door to enter the Babidi spaceship. So the game jumps you to 125. That is not bad. However, the issue stands where after you fight Super Boo, you're given a halt, and you gotta go fight him again, which leads to when he absorbs Gotenks, and then you fight him as Gotenks absorbed. But Gohan's door jumps to level 140. And it's like, okay, so you boosted me to 125, I temporarily fought Boo, now the battle is slightly interrupted, so I can go resume fighting him again, but now I have to level grind. Like, it's just a hard halt. Throughout the game, it's been decent. It's like, okay, level grind a little bit here, proceed. But for Gohan, it was like, okay, here's a boost, but then hard halt. Now, hard grind. And then continue with the story. It's like, Jesus Christ, bro. And then when you switch back to Goku and Vegeta, I believe there's also kind of like a hard halt and hard grind there. Because, well, you have to level grind in order to fight Super Buu Gohan Absorbed, and then it would proceed to you becoming Vegito temporarily. Before that, you did the Fusion Reborn segment in Hell. So you grinded to, I believe, level 125 as well, when you were doing the whole Fusion Reborn Gogeta thing. And now, to fight Buu, I believe Goku's door jumped to 150, so you pretty much have to grind 25 levels. And you can't just be like, okay, I'll just grind Goku to level 150 and leave Vegeta as is. No, because when the characters fuse in this game, their level is shared. So the game tries to balance it out if the characters are at uneven level. And I always dislike that. I always try to have my characters in the same level, like Goten, Trunks, Goku, and Vegeta. When they fuse, I like to have them on par with each other, if not near on par. So when the game tries to balance out the unevenness, it could sort of make sense. So it would put you at a hard disadvantage if you grinded Goku to level 150 but left Vegeta at 125. You would be like underpowering yourself. So I had to double grind 50 levels essentially on both Goku and Vegeta, so that way they can meet the criteria for not only the level door, but for the fusion to be equal, and that would lead you into the end game. So that one was another like hard halt moment where it's like, ugh, you maybe call that bad pacing or whatever. Like up to that point, up to near the end of the game, the level grinding has been somewhat decent. You know, some may say the Goten and Trunks level where you can still search for the Dragon Balls were tedious, but for me personally, I find the hard halt for Ultimate Gohan and then Goku / Vegeta really the egregious part.